The fact that to this day I'm harassed and that people write these vicious posts about me, claiming that I'm some money-grabbing egomaniac that, you know, raped his dead friend's memory to make a show about himself and make loads of money, just makes me feel sick, because it's a lie. Please just leave me alone.
In 2004, Thomas Ridgewell joined Eddsworld to voice the character of Tom. In 2012, he took control of the show entirely, becoming the lead showrunner, co-writer, and director. Just 4 years later, he left the show forever. And this is why. This is TomSka, popular YouTuber and a longtime friend of Ed Gould. Just like Ed's other friends at the time, Tom was written into Eddsworld to voice a character based on his own likeness in 2004. This Tom was always meant to be a caricature of his voice actor, but nowadays he only bears a superficial resemblance to the person who originally voiced him, just like all of the other characters within the show. The fan confusion between, say, Tom the person and Tom the character is a common and unfortunate one that will become important later. Tom had always played an active role in episode production before The Legacy. As well as voicing the main character, he has writing credits in videos like Space Face and Movie Makers, and he supplied music for episodes like Spares and the Atlantis episode. It won't be a surprise that he's a multi-talented individual if you know anything about his solo work. He's known as TomSka because that's the name of his incredibly popular YouTube channel, but he's been making films for the internet since before YouTube even existed. He's a very talented and hilarious filmmaker who just so happened to get involved in a completely different and also incredibly popular internet show that was made by his close friend. Ed's death in 2012 was always a possibility, but nothing was ever planned. They never had that discussion about what was going to happen to Eddsworld, whether it was going to continue without Ed or be laid to rest entirely. It wasn't until weeks later that Tom and Matt were told by Ed's mother that he'd wanted the show to carry on without him. Tom was 21 years old when he agreed to keep Eddsworld going. I'm 21 years old, and I cannot imagine what that kind of responsibility must feel like. The big issue going forward was money. Animation isn't free, it takes a lot of time and skill, and if you don't have that skill then you need to pay someone else to do it for you. Ed had always done basically all of the animation himself because he made money from Eddsworld. The show had hundreds of thousands of fans, and Ed was able to pour hours of his life into animation because, yeah, he enjoyed it, but also that's how he made a living. They could have just used the money the show was already making to fund more episodes, but that comes with its own suite of issues. With Ed's passing in such recent memory, it would be impossible for someone to just make money off the show without being accused of capitalizing off the tragedy. Even if 100% of the profits went into the show's budget, there is no doubt that some people who didn't know any better would just see the entire operation as being exploitative. And if you're at all familiar with the way narratives spread on the internet to become as rage-inducing as possible, it shouldn't be surprising that Tom didn't feel comfortable taking the profits directly from the show. So they tried something radical. All of the profits the show made through ads and merchandise would be donated to charity, while the show itself would be funded entirely through fan donations. Crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo were an incredibly novel development in 2012. Patreon didn't even exist at that time. Internet culture was still grappling with the idea that a YouTuber could even ask for money. Sponsorships and merchandising were seen by and large as a YouTuber selling out, but today that kind of stuff is just to be expected. Naturally, Tom would be taking on the roles of showrunner and writer and director and producer, with another one of him and Ed's mutual friends, Eddie Bowley, taking his right-hand side. The two had been doing this whole YouTube thing for a very long time, and considering their own experiences and close ties with Eddsworld, it made sense for the two of them to be in charge of the whole operation. You're probably going to notice that I won't be talking very much about Matt in this video, and truth be told, Matt just didn't have much to do back then. I know that's kind of strange considering how much he does for the show nowadays, but other than doing a few bits behind the scenes, Matt was mostly just voicing his character. Tom was also just a much more prominent figure in the public eye. He was already a world-famous YouTuber, and now his production team was taking on the show with his face in all the crowdfunding videos. Matt was doing his own thing, just with much less public scrutiny. Eddsworld Legacy was sold on one promise. If we reach the funding goal, we will give you 1 more year of Eddsworld, 4 new episodes, and 4 new shorts. And then they reached that goal within a week and decided that they'd actually make 5 episodes and 5 shorts instead. Feel free to come to your own conclusions about what counts as a full episode and what counts as a short. The show would still be making money off advertisements and merchandise, but as part of the campaign, they pledged to donate all of that show's revenue to charity. In the end, the campaign raised £70,000 for 10 new animations. Once production began, they immediately ran into a brick wall. They quickly realised that £70,000 was not going to be enough to achieve what they'd set out to do. To afford that much professional grade animation, they needed to find another £50,000. In order to fulfill the promises he made in the Indiegogo, Tom would have to spend 4 whole years of his life writing, directing, and voice acting in these films while being paid nothing. And the extra 50 grand that was needed to finish production, that came out of his own pocket. Tom essentially funded half of Eddsworld Legacy himself while seeing no return on investment. He pumped so much money into Eddsworld Legacy that his bank account was audited. He was investigated by the British government. That's how committed he was to completing this thing. In hindsight, crowdfunding like this was just not the way to go. Not for a project at this scale in 2012 with a team that hadn't done anything like this before. Some animators initially saw difficulty being paid the right amount of money due to the aforementioned budgeting issues, but reparations and apologies have since been made. A lot of the budget also went into physical perks, like posters and books and custom portraits, all the way up to a £2,000 one-of-a-kind DVD featuring hours of remastered footage and original music. The delivery of these perks was shockingly inefficient, and the DVD was scrapped entirely, with Tom and the person who donated for it agreeing to just put the money back into the show. It would have made much more sense to just take the money that the show was making and put it into production, but as an upside, it meant that all the revenue could be given to charity, and that was a lot of money. During Tom's run, around £90,000 was donated to Click Sergeant, a charity that helps support families of young people with cancer. Tom's decision to donate the show's profits to charity touched more lives than any one donation or fundraiser ever could, and I can't even begin to imagine how much that decision has done for so many people. And to top it all off, Tom did keep his promise of delivering more episodes. What was originally just 1 more year of extra Eddsworld turned into 4, and they turned out to be some of the most beloved in the show's history. You can really tell that Tom looked to Ed for inspiration when making these episodes. They kept up the traditions like filling animation with constant Easter eggs and callbacks to old episodes, which actually inspired me to make this channel. A surprisingly great example of that is Asdafland. While Asdaf Movie was obviously Tom's invention, Ed actually really liked Asdaf Movie. He animated a couple of the installments, he voiced a few of the characters, and snuck references to it throughout the classic episodes. ASDF actually appeared in Eddsworld before Tom made the first Asdaf movie, so including a reference to one of its first pieces of promotional material was a great way of continuing that tradition. That being said, it was now Tom in charge, and you could really see his writing style and sense of humour making its way into episodes. And this shouldn't be surprising. This is gonna sound really weird to a lot of people, especially since half the fandom only subscribed once Tom had completed his tenure, but the overwhelming response to episodes like Fun Dead, Salunatics, and The End were very mixed. Lots of people really did not like them at the time. The Legacy had faster pacing, more focus on structured stories, the music sounded more like Tom's own sketches, and it generally had a more modern feel. Some people just didn't like that. Some people didn't think the episodes were funny, some people didn't like the stories, some people didn't like the general tone. It just wasn't for them. But the most common criticism, the soundbite that would be repeated ad nauseum throughout his entire time as showrunner, was, "This isn't how Ed used to make it. Eddsworld has become Tom's world." This is where I have to let some of my own bias shine through. I really like the animations from around this time, in large part because I really like Tom as a creator. TomSka is one of those rare creatives whose work I've never grown tired of. I've been laughing at his jokes since before I was old enough to have a YouTube account, and through constant changes in style and format, he's managed to keep me entertained into adulthood. I deeply respect him as an artist and as a human being. He's a massive inspiration for myself and many others, and on top of all that, I think he's just a genuinely funny comedian who can make anything funny from serious to silly. I never knew Eddsworld before TomSka. Most people hadn't. Tom's channel was twice as big as Edd's when he took it over, though I'm willing to bet that most people found each channel separately. When I found the show, it was just another great TomSka project with his signature style brought into a cartoon format. Obviously, I'd come to find Edd's old stuff and love Eddsworld as its own thing, but even then I always saw the legacy as a natural evolution of what came before. I'm pretty sure I was actually in the majority in that opinion, by the way, but a lot of folks were unwilling to accept any sort of change, and because of that, I think they really missed out on some genuinely great animations that they may have enjoyed otherwise. A lot of criticism also fell on the way Tom's character took focus in some of the episodes, particularly in the end. There was still plenty of Ed-centric episodes and some Matt-centric episodes, but a lot of people, particularly much younger fans who didn't know any better, thought that Tom's character was made more important in the legacy as a vanity move to make TomSka feel better, or promote himself or something. This should be pretty obvious to every single one of you, but I'm going to say it anyway. This man and this cartoon, not the same thing. Not even close. Even if they were, Tom didn't need the ego boost. His channel was way bigger than Eddsworld. Tom's character in the legacy was written to be violent, cynical, relatively level-headed, and confrontational. These traits aren't exactly aspirational, you'd never want to describe yourself like this, but they're traits that drive stories forward and lend themselves well to certain jokes. As a comedic device, Tom was written to be the straight man, a character who tries to maintain composure while the world around them slowly goes insane, setting up punchlines and reacting off the world's weirdness. A staple of comedy and an absolute necessity for a lot of jokes. And as a storytelling device, stories are driven by conflict. A stoic old-timer who butts heads with the bright-eyed rookie, a no-nonsense cynic who just wants some peace and quiet, an agent of chaos who forces the hero and villain to bond over a shared enemy, a guy with a gun who likes to blow things up. These stories need a character who's violent, cynical, level-headed, and confrontational, and who better to fill these roles than Tom, especially if you need a story where they need to clash with the return of Tord. Oh god, we need to talk about Tord. Okay, so this was probably the most controversial thing that Tom ever did as a showrunner. If you joined the fandom after 2016, I'm willing to bet that Tord's character had something to do with how you found it, given the popularity of the end and Tord's character in general. He was always this weird fascination for the fandom, and bringing him back as a one-off villain was just an undeniably cool piece of fan service. Tord's whole aesthetic and the way he was written to clash with Tom in this episode is why the end went down as one of the most beloved and popular videos on the entire channel. I genuinely believe that the end and the way it was written is a big part of what kept Eddsworld so evergreen in the interregnum between episodes. There were problems, however. So to start, Tord was essentially brought back without the original voice actor's consultation, which is a fair critique. I mean, Eddsworld owns the character, they were in their right to do such a thing. I'm sure Tom would have tried to get in touch with the real Tord if he hadn't completely fallen off the face of the earth in 2008. But whatever, moral dilemma to unpack there. Then there was the other thing. So, in a blog post about the end, Tom claimed that Tord in this episode was a metaphor for the unexpected return of Ed Gould's illness. This was stupid. That statement was a load of rubbish that Tom made up because he thought it sounded clever at the time. His co-writer never intended this, the story was never written to be a metaphor, there's no other theming within the episodes that suggests any sort of commentary. He's even corrected the post since making it to clarify that this was just a load of nonsense. But he still said it. That one stupid comment made its way around the fandom like any other somewhat enraging sentiment would, to become the worst faith interpretation of his words imaginable. There was this false narrative that Tom, the human being, actually hated Tord, his old friend and co-star. Some fans genuinely believed that the end was Tom's way of saying that Tord was literally cancer, and that he wrote the episode in the way that he did to air his disdain for that man in the most tasteless way possible. That's obviously not true. I hope that you can see that, right? Tord was brought back to make the last ever episode the biggest, most explosive, most fan-pleasing episode imaginable, and I really think that they succeeded. But the false meta-narrative that formed around the unfortunate link between the voice actors and the characters' names, as well as one bad mistake at the end of one blog post, was enough to leave a bad taste in some people's mouths, despite everything that Tom did for the show up until then. It wasn't their fault that they fell for a bad narrative, and Tom definitely did not deserve that kind of judgment for just one mistake. But I can guarantee that some people still believe that false narrative to this day. The only thing that was ever promised by the Legacy was one more season of Eddsworld, with a limited number of new animations, which Tom and his team delivered. He fulfilled the promise he made to the community and Ed's family, but near the end of production, Tom found out that Ed's family actually wanted the show to continue beyond the Legacy. That was never on the table for Tom. That's why the final episode of his run was called The End. That was supposed to be his grand finale. The Legacy was a labour of love, but an absolute money pit financially, and also a creative bind for someone with other ambitions. Even after he formally handed control over to Ed's family, he was offered the chance to continue, at least voicing the character, but he said no, partially out of a need for closure and a desire to let his friend and his show go.
The Legacy project had always been about giving Ed's show a final chapter, not keeping it going forever. A lot of us were upset as we'd worked so hard towards an end goal and wanted desperately to move on and let the wounds of Ed's death heal. Constantly reopening to think or draw like him was frankly traumatizing, so once we'd finished, we were done. The core team disbanded and we all went to focus on other projects as planned. Eddsworld Legacy was a favor to Ed, his family, and his fans.
But as has been proven time and time again, you only have so much control over narratives like that. In an attempt to distance himself from the fandom amid rising harassment campaigns, new fans who didn't understand what the Legacy was believed that Tom abandoned the show and broke a promise to Ed that he never made. Even years later, whenever Tom was brought up in fandom circles, the discussion was rarely about his achievements or his contributions or his sacrifices. It was always about everything he didn't do.
As time has gone on, new fans arrived and new narratives told. Ones where Ed died in 2016 and I immediately turned my back, ones where I quit halfway and stole the money, ones where I did anything other than exactly what I promised. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt immensely.
I don't want you to leave this video feeling bad about being an Eddsworld fan, or feeling angry about the actions of a few kids. That's literally the worst thing you could do. If the last 20 minutes have taught you anything, then it should be that a fake but believable story is an incredibly damaging thing, and that only gets worse when there's an opposing story to start an argument over. Anger spreads among people faster and more intensely than any other emotion. Remember that. If you, like me, are upset by this kind of stuff, then you can mitigate it by setting an example, putting more good into the world, and not giving the toxic people more oxygen. Almost everyone who was angry at Tom was a very little kid who fell for a fake story, and they will eventually grow up and be embarrassed to even think about their actions when they're older. A lot of them probably are already embarrassed by some of the things they did. The Eddsworld community, by and large, is a force for good. We raised thousands of pounds for charity. We created and shared beautiful artwork, and we kept the show alive for 4 years while the production team prepared for its revival. We ran the show for 4 years. We kept Eddsworld spinning. And other than a few bad actors, I think we did a pretty fantastic job. That's something to be proud of. And going forward, I think that we can learn from the mistakes of the past to build something even more beautiful. Nowadays, TomSka and Eddsworld are two completely separate entities. As much as Tom's story would be incomplete without Eddsworld, the show is now firmly behind him, and nobody in the fandom even really thinks about him anymore. The last he spoke about Eddsworld meaningfully was before its revival, and in his mind, the show was already over, and he was more than ready to move on with his life. Tom doesn't need Eddsworld anymore, and to be brutally honest, Eddsworld doesn't need him. Hasn't for a long time. Now that Matt and Chris are in charge, the show has a much more sensible financing structure, though the donating to charity stuff didn't end entirely with the legacy. I do think the new episodes feel a lot more like the classic era, with what I feel is a slower pace and stories that are mostly just suggestions so that they can tell jokes with the form of these little skits around one concept. Obviously people may like this approach more or less than what came before, but to me it feels like another natural evolution. Ed Templar also fills Tom's shoes as a voice actor so well that whenever I read the new comics, I actually read them in his voice, funnily enough. Thomas Ridgewell has done so much for all of us. Not only was he an amazing voice actor for a fantastic character, he put everything he had into keeping Eddsworld alive. He selflessly created some of the best loved and most popular animations on the internet, and donated every penny of the profits to charity. Without his contributions, I honestly don't think that Eddsworld would be as prolific as it currently is, still finding new fans constantly and providing a new team of fantastic artists with the opportunity to make new art that reaches millions. Thanks, Tom.